One of the things that came up in your conclusions is certainly when you look at Republicans versus Democrats, and the perception is that this misinformation really is a Republican phenomenon. Is that the case? I mean, this really, I know we're talking red state, blue state. Is there equal amounts of disinformation on both sides, or?
No, this is not a symmetric phenomenon. It is heavily asymmetric, and in the fashion that you suggest, which is to say, study after study done by academic social scientists shows that both conservative politicians and conservative rank and file voters go to sites that are known for publishing misinformation more frequently, share that information more readily, and their opinions are changed more often by that kind of information. This is presumably an outgrowth of the direction that the Republican Party has taken in the last, 15 years in general, where it has gone from being the party of Ronald Reagan, who was very conservative, Bob Dole, John McCain, to the party of Donald Trump. There's been a lot of change, and the Democrats have, by some measures, moved to the left somewhat, but not at all by the same amount. And Democrats tend to get their information from center and center-left sources, while increasingly Republicans are getting their information from very far-right sources online. The best measure of this is that fully 70%, more than 2/3 of Republicans, consistently tell pollsters that Joe Biden was not legitimately elected the president. This is an extraordinary situation where you can go 2 years after an election, or nearly 2 years, and a good portion of the country just doesn't accept the outcome from the last presidential election.
Yeah, it's hard to glean necessarily from doing research, but certainly the last election, one of the biggest issues was just foreign interference, Russia, etc. Is that something that you looked at? Is it something that really is relevant, frankly, to this discussion? Who is the source of this disinformation versus what the actual information is?
Oh, it's absolutely critical, because it will affect how you respond to the situation. And the two scenarios are quite distinct. If you have a foreign nation state, such as Russia, although you should also add to that group countries like Iran and China, and they are and operatives from those countries are disguising themselves as being from other countries, say Americans, and opening accounts and getting into flame wars with people's, buying advertisements, fostering divisiveness or favoring a particular politician. That's actually illegal in a clean, straightforward way. You're not a non-American can't, under false pretenses, under fraudulently set up social media accounts pretending to be one person, and then set about to interfere with an election. That violates laws, and people coming out of 2016 were indicted by the federal government. Not that anybody was put in prison, because they remain in Russia. They're not within our jurisdiction. But that's one situation. And that's actually something that law enforcement authorities are concerned about and are willing to investigate and prosecute. There's no question there about free speech issues, because you don't have a First Amendment right to disguise yourself as another person from a different country and interfere with an election. It's a very different question to be an American, either under your name or under somebody else's name. Twitter, for example, doesn't double check and see whether you really are who you say you are, and simply say that elections in this country are corrupt. that could be seen as a straightforward opinion. And in normal times, you might say, well, you certainly wouldn't want the government getting involved with that, the government judging whose political views, even if those views are based on falsehoods, are valid or not. So you have to the government gets taken out of the picture altogether. The First Amendment protects speech, even when it's outrageous speech, and often even sometimes when it's even false and outrageous speech, because it's difficult to determine truth or falsity. So with domestically generated disinformation coming from authentic sources and sometimes even from inauthentic sources, it's a much more complicated undertaking to figure out how to counter it. All that said, these individual platforms can permit or not permit anybody they want from talking on their platforms. They are private companies that operate online venues, and it is fully within their authority to say who gets to play in their playground. And the First Amendment should not be held up as a kind of fake a way of confusing people into thinking that a Facebook or a TikTok doesn't have the authority to decide who gets to express themselves on